In this video, we're going to show you how to spray paint your valve cover and get long-lasting results you can be proud of. Take a look at that difference. And the best part is, it's super simple. Let's get to it. The first step is to remove the air filter that prevents access to the valve cover. Just unscrew the clamps and bolts and take it off, but be careful dirt or debris doesn't fall into the carburetor, as this could cause serious issues. So it's best to cover it with a nitrile glove. Better safe than sorry. To take off the valve cover, we'll need to remove these smaller valve cover bolts, but not these big ones. Those are cylinder head bolts, so stuff that's mounted on those bolts like this wire and harness cover can stay in place. Other parts like this clamp do need to be taken off, as they are mounted on the smaller valve cover bolts that we'll need to remove. And the same goes for that one in the back, preventing the wire and harness from moving around and scraping through the wire and insulation. Disconnect all hoses attached to the valve cover and secure any cables or linkages to the side that might be in your way. You can simply use some tape to do so. Then remove those clamps and wires, but be careful if they are a bit stuck. Old plastic gets brittle and might break if you put too much force on it. Then remove all the bolts. It doesn't matter in which order you take them out. Just make sure you've removed them all before you start pulling on the valve cover. Like in our case, there's one hidden behind the valve cover underneath this wiring harness, which makes it really hard to see and reach. A trick you can use if your valve cover has different types of bolts and washers is to use a piece of scrap paper or cardboard you have laying around. Then draw the shape of the valve cover on it with front and rear indicated and simply push the bolts through in the right spot. Now you can easily remember where they came from. Now, normally the valve cover will come off without much of a fight, but if they've used a liquid gasket instead of a solid one like in our case, then it might be stuck on there pretty good. First, try to wiggle it loose by hand or use a rubber mallet to tap the valve cover loose, but be careful not to whack it too hard or it might crack or dent depending on the material. If playing whack-a-mole with the valve cover doesn't work, you only have one option left, and that's to carefully try to pry it loose with a flat screwdriver. You want to do this near a corner because that gives you more leverage, which means you'll need to apply less force with your screwdriver, lowering the chance of damaging it. And try to get your screwdriver really in between there so you don't slip off, potentially chipping the material. Also, try to pry it loose at a thicker or sturdier part, again to reduce the chance of cracking the valve cover, and so the new gasket will have enough material to seal everything off in case you scratch the contact surface. But don't pry it loose at the thin edge of the holes, because that thin edge might break off and ruin your valve cover. And there it goes. With the gasket loose on one side, you can try to wiggle it off, but chances are you'll need to repeat the process on the other side as well. Once loose, you can take it off and start the prep work. Then the next step is to take as much plastic parts off as possible, and in our case, carefully remove this sticker that contains information about our vehicle. These old plastic parts, apart from the oil fill cap, are notoriously difficult to remove on our Jeep without breaking them, so we're going to play it safe and leave them on. Then, after taking off the oil cap, grab a sharp knife and carefully cut around the sticker, but be careful you only cut through the paint and not leave deep gashes in the valve cover itself. It's only soft aluminum after all. Then carefully pull the sticker loose, but make sure it doesn't tear. Now carefully tape off all the plastic parts you don't want to get paint on. This will also protect the plastic for when you're sanding the surrounding metal. And for areas that might be greasy or have oil on them, first degrease the surface so the tape will stick properly and won't come off while spray painting. As you can see, there's a lot of paint flaking off because the aluminum underneath is oxidized. So we're going to start by removing as much loose paint as possible, and we're simply going to use one of these cheap metal brushes to do so. You can also use a chemical paint stripper, but be careful. If your valve cover is plastic, this will damage it, which is also the reason we're not using it here, as we still have plastic parts mounted on the valve cover. And because we're going to paint it with Raptor spray, which is a very thick paint, there's no need to get the surface as smooth as with normal paint. And if the remaining paint managed to stay on for more than 25 years and it withstood a metal brush trying to scrape it off, it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. So it will be a good enough surface to paint on. But make sure you scrape hard enough so no bad parts like this spot remain hidden. The paint is wrinkly and it looks like there's air moving underneath, so we'll definitely have to scrape this off. And just like that, the bad paint flakes off, revealing the oxidized aluminum. Now keep doing this until no loose bits are left and only solid paint remains. The next step is to sand away all the oxidation and any hard edges that might show up through the new paint. You can use a Dremel tool with a wire brush or sanding pads, which works quicker for larger surfaces, or just do it by hand, which gives you more control and allows you to reach all nooks and crannies. Now that the surface is prepped, it's time to clean it. Degrease the entire surface with brake cleaner or isopropyl alcohol. Then put on some clean gloves so you don't keep spreading dust and grease everywhere, because this will prevent your paint from properly bonding to the surface. Then degrease it one more time and you're ready for painting. Before spray painting, always read your specific paint's instructions and drying times, as this will be different depending on the type and brand of paint. It is best practice to use a primer, which ensures your actual paint coat sticks properly. So we're going to use U-POL Grip 4, which is a special primer for Raptor spray. We've put a link to all the products we've used in the description below so you can easily find them. After shaking the can for the indicated amount of time to make sure everything is properly mixed, apply it in thin layers from about 10 to 12 inches away. Work in smooth motions and maintain the same distance from the surface the entire time. Never start or stop directly on top of whatever it is that you're painting. Always begin spraying before it and stop spraying after it. This will ensure an even spray pattern and drastically reduce the amount of droplets in your paintwork, as these mostly occur when beginning or ending a spray. Repeat this process 1 or 2 more times after letting it dry for the indicated amount of time. Now, for normal paint, you have to repeat this technique to get a smooth finish, but we're using Raptor spray, so we need to spray it from 2 to 3 feet distance in fast motions to avoid getting big blobs of paint. Like with any 2K paint, you first need to shake Raptor spray for 2 minutes. Place the cap on the bottom and press the can down on a solid, flat surface to pop the valve, and then shake for another 2 minutes to mix the two components together. Now you're ready for painting. Unfortunately, our camera decided to call it a day when we began our first layer, but we can show you the second coat, which is the exact same technique, and the results, of course. As mentioned before, it's important to start spraying before the surface and end after it, never on top. This way you get a more even result and avoid droplets that would ruin your paint. But because we use Raptor spray, we have to do so in quicker motions and from a much farther distance to avoid creating puddles of paint. And if the object you're going to paint isn't flat and has ridges or difficult shapes, it's important to spray from all angles to make sure everything gets covered with paint. But be careful with Raptor spray that you don't put too much paint on it at once. You don't want to fill those grooves with loads of paint and make them disappear. If you're spray painting outside, you'll need to be careful for leaves or other debris from the surrounding trees falling in your paint while it dries. So it's best to simply place an empty box over it so nothing can fall in. After removing the masking tape while the paint hadn't hardened yet and letting it dry for the indicated amount of time, it's time to admire the result. This paint is super tough and will last for a really long time. And the rough structure of the Raptor spray will look great in contrast with the black plastic parts on and around the engine. Not to mention that it's matching our wheels, which we painted in another video that you can check out on our channel. It even has a beautiful shimmer to it when you hold it in the sunlight. Now you need to thoroughly clean the contact surfaces on the engine itself and on the valve cover before installing a new gasket and torquing everything down. But we'll show you all the steps, do's and don'ts in a separate video on how to replace the valve cover gasket. So make sure to check it out as well, because you always need to replace the valve cover gasket when taking off the valve cover, otherwise it won't seal anymore and leak oil. Now all that's left is to reinstall the brackets, hoses, and cables that you previously disconnected and admire the result. Just take a look at that difference. From an old beat-up valve cover with paint flaking off everywhere to one that looks like it just came out of the factory. Before and after. Thanks for watching. If you liked our video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. It helps out the channel a lot. And don't forget to hit that bell button so you don't miss any of our uploads. More videos are on the way, so we'll see you on the next one.